Welcome to our deep dive, everybody, into, this escalating conflict between Iran and Israel.
Yeah.
You shared that Dhruv Rathee YouTube video breaking it all down. And yeah, I mean, it feels like we're on a razor's edge. Missiles in the night sky, conflicting reports all over the place, and just, promises of retaliation. I
Yeah.
mean, where do we even begin?
Well, I think starting with that October 1st attack on Israel is a pretty good place, right? Those images of missiles streaking through the night sky.
Yeah.
Definitely attention grabbing, to say the least. It's a stark reminder that this conflict has really moved into a new and quite frankly, dangerous
A
phase.
turning point, almost. But I have to admit, I was surprised to learn that Iran's, direct involvement is a pretty recent development.
Yeah. For years, their strategy was really more about these proxy wars,
Yeah.
supporting groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon or the Houthis over in Yemen. So basically fighting their battles through, intermediaries. But now it seems they're stepping directly onto the battlefield.
So, like with that massive missile and drone attack back in April, Drew's video mentioned it was potentially even bigger than this recent one in October. But
Yeah.
it kind of flew under the radar with everything else going on in the world at the time.
Exactly. And we can't forget that April attack, it was a direct response to an Israeli airstrike in Syria, an airstrike that actually killed several Iranian officers. So Iran called it an act of revenge, but it also, I think, illustrates this dangerous tit-for-tat pattern. And this has really become a hallmark of this whole conflict.
Tit for tat. I'm not sure I follow.
Well, it's basically this endless cycle of attack and then retaliation. Each side justifying their actions, claiming it's a response to the other side's aggression. We see it all the time. Israel strikes Iranian targets in Syria, and then, bam, Iran retaliates with missile attacks on Israel, and so on and so on. A vicious cycle and incredibly difficult to break.
It's like this cycle spinning faster and faster.
Yeah.
Makes you feel like we're teetering on the brink of something much, much larger.
I'd say so. And that brings up, a crucial question. How far is each side willing to go? Israel, for example, they rely heavily on these sophisticated defense systems. Systems like Iron Dome, David Sling, and the Arrow system.
Those names, they sound so futuristic. Can you tell us a bit more about them?
Sure, they're basically multi-layered systems, and they're all designed to intercept incoming rockets and missiles. So think of it as like a high-tech shield protecting Israel from attacks from the air. Iron Dome, for instance, it's incredibly effective against short-range rockets. While David Sling, that one tackles the medium-range missiles, and then you have the Arrow system, which is specifically designed to intercept long-range ballistic missiles.
Wow, that's seriously impressive.
Yeah.
But Drew's video, it also mentioned that these systems are, incredibly expensive to operate.
Yeah, that's true. And that's actually where Iran sees an opportunity. Every single interception, it costs Israel millions of dollars. So Iran can essentially try to drain their resources, by just launching wave after wave of attacks, even if a lot of them are intercepted.
So it almost feels deliberate, right? Like a war of attrition. I mean, there's that quote from the Iranian foreign ministry spokesperson suggesting that Israel should be grateful for the limited nature of this October attack.
That's a statement that's open to interpretation for sure. Some might see it as a genuine warning, while others might say it's just, a propaganda tactic. But what's undeniable is the underlying message, and that is Iran is trying to signal that they have the capability to inflict, far, far greater damage if they choose to.
It's a chilling thought.
Mhm.
But even if those attacks are intercepted, I mean, what about the people on the ground? You can't intercept the fear and trauma, right?
You're absolutely right. It's easy to get so caught up in the technology, the military aspects, and all the political maneuvering that we forget about the human cost. The number of Palestinian casualties it's just staggering, and the displacement of people is absolutely heartbreaking.
That's where Jonathan Glazer's statement of, that really hit me hard. For a Jewish filmmaker, especially one who won an Oscar for a film about the Holocaust, to speak out against using that historical tragedy to justify the suffering inflicted upon another group of people. That's powerful. And it's a reminder, I think, that we always need to be careful not to dehumanize our enemies.
His words definitely add a profound ethical dimension to all of this. We can't just talk about missiles and defense systems. We have to acknowledge the human beings, the people caught in the crossfire, and also grapple with the complex reality, the fact that both sides have legitimate grievances. Both sides have suffered immensely.
Speaking of complexities, I was really surprised by just how much power Hezbollah has in all of this. I mean, they're not a nation state, right? But they've managed to displace tens of thousands of Israelis and disrupt global trade through those Red Sea attacks.
Absolutely. Hezbollah's influence in the region, it's really significant. They have a sophisticated military, a vast network of supporters, and a really deep understanding of the political landscape. They're a force to be reckoned with, that's for sure. And their actions have a huge impact on, well, on the dynamics of this whole conflict.
It adds another layer of unpredictability, don't you think? I mean, how do you negotiate with a group that's not, a traditional nation state? It makes de-escalation so much harder.
It does. And then to add to that complexity, there's also been this string of high-profile assassinations leading up to this October attack. And we're talking about key figures like Ismail Haniyeh, Ibrahim Akil, a Hezbollah missile unit leader, Brigadier General Abbas Nilfarushan.
And then culminating in the death of Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah. Could that be a turning point, do you think?
It's certainly possible. Nasrallah was a very charismatic and influential figure within Hezbollah, so his death is a major blow to the organization. How will they respond long term? That remains to be seen. Some analysts believe it could lead to a period of instability, potentially even infighting as they, try to choose a new leader and figure out their future course of action.
That uncertainty, it is worrying, especially in such a volatile environment. And what about the global response? Is anyone trying to, calm things down?
Well, the international community has definitely condemned the violence, but, the responses, they've been mostly cautious. The UN has called for de-escalation, and countries like India have, they've urged both sides to show restraint, to, return to dialogue.
But is anyone actually listening?
It's hard to say, honestly. Right now, everyone seems to be speaking the language of retaliation, which is why, that quote from Mahatma Gandhi at the end of Dhruv's video, it's so powerful. An eye for an eye ends up making the whole world blind. It's a really sobering reminder that this cycle of violence, it just leads to more suffering.
Okay, so we've laid out some of the key events, the main players, the weapons, and the anxieties. But the big question is, where do we go from here?
That is the million-dollar question. And to even attempt to answer it, I think we need to step back. Look at the bigger picture. What are the historical forces that are driving this conflict? What are the geopolitical interests at play? And most importantly, is there any path at all towards a peaceful resolution? What's really concerning, I think, is that this conflict, it's not just about Iran and Israel.
Yeah, you're right. It's more like this, I don't know, this giant chessboard, right?
Yeah.
And every single move just has these ripple effects across the entire Middle East.
Exactly. And one of the most significant pieces on that board, well, that's the United States. They've been a staunch ally of Israel, for decades now, providing military aid, diplomatic support, the whole nine yards.
But hasn't that relationship been kind of, rocky lately? I mean, with that whole Iran nuclear deal thing.
There have definitely been tensions. The 2015 Iran nuclear deal, well, it was supposed to limit Iran's nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief, right? But it became this major point of contention. And then the Trump administration, they withdrew the U.S. from the agreement back in 2018, much to the dismay, of course, of European allies and, well, Iran.
And that seems like it just, added fuel to the fire, didn't it?
Yeah.
Iran basically ramped up their nuclear program, tensions went through the roof, and, well, here we are.
Yeah, it definitely complicated things. And then on top of that, you have Russia and China, right? They're playing their own strategic games in the region. Russia has been, well, strengthening its ties with Iran, while China is, they're increasingly investing in the Middle East, particularly in Iran.
So everyone's picking sides and digging in. Is there even any, ANY room for diplomacy at this point?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? I mean, the international community, they've called for a return to dialogue, but right now, both sides seem, well, pretty locked in this cycle of escalation.
And don't forget about the shadow of nuclear weapons kind of hanging over everything.
Oh, absolutely. Israel, it's widely believed they possess nuclear weapons, even though they've never officially confirmed or denied it. And Iran, well, they don't currently have nukes, but their nuclear program, it's been advancing.
It's terrifying. It's like everyone's holding these incredibly dangerous cards, and no one wants to be the first to back down.
That's the real danger with this tit-for-tat dynamic, right? It creates this whole environment of mistrust and fear, where even the smallest miscalculation, well, it could have devastating consequences.
So we've got this complex web of international alliances, the threat of, potential nuclear war, and this endless cycle of attacks. It feels pretty hopeless.
It's certainly a challenging situation, no doubt. But even in the midst of, well, all this chaos, there are people working, tirelessly to find some path to peace.
Really? Who are these people, and what are they actually doing?
There are all sorts of non-governmental organizations, NGOs for short, both within the region and internationally, and they're dedicated to, conflict resolution and peace building.
So not governments or armies, but, just people trying to find common ground.
Exactly. They work on the ground, building bridges between communities, facilitating dialogue, promoting understanding, all that good stuff.
But how do you even begin to do that in a place where there's, well, so much pain and anger?
It's not easy, that's for sure. It takes a ton of courage, patience, and you need a really deep belief in the possibility of change. A lot of these NGOs, they focus on something called Track 2 diplomacy.
Track 2 diplomacy. I've never heard of that.
It basically refers to, all the efforts to build peace and resolve conflict that happen, well, outside of those formal government channels. So it involves bringing together influential individuals from both sides, right? Could be community leaders, academics, religious figures, that sort of thing. And the idea is to get them to engage in dialogue, find common ground.
So you kind of bypass all the, political posturing and get right to the heart of the matter.
In a way, yes. The idea is that by fostering these personal connections and building trust, on an individual level, well, you can create this ripple effect that eventually influences, the broader political landscape.
It's a powerful idea, but it sounds incredibly difficult. Can these small-scale efforts really make a difference? Especially when you've got, governments and armies clashing.
Well, if you look at history, it shows us that change often starts at the grassroots level. I mean, think about the civil rights movement in the U.S., right? Or the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa. Those movements, they were driven by ordinary people who, well, they just refused to accept the status quo.
So even in a conflict, as complex and entrenched as this one, individual actions can have an impact.
Absolutely. Every act of courage, every voice raised for peace, every attempt to, to build understanding across these divides, all of it contributes to, to a shift in the collective consciousness.
I don't know, that's encouraging, I guess.
Yeah.
But realistically, what can WE do? We're sitting here, so far away. We're not diplomats and negotiators. Can we actually do anything to help bring about peace in the Middle East?
We can definitely do more than just, sit back and watch from the sidelines. One thing we can all do is stay informed. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by all this complexity, but the more we understand, the better equipped we are to, to advocate for peaceful solutions.
So stay informed. Okay, what else? What about donating to, to some of those NGOs you were talking about?
That's a great idea. A lot of these organizations are doing, incredible work on the ground, but they need those donations to continue their efforts. Even a small contribution can make it can make a real difference.
Yeah. And we can use our voices,
Right.
right, to, amplify that message of peace, talk to our friends and family about this conflict, share information online, contact our elected officials, and just express our support for those diplomatic solutions.
Exactly. Remember, peace, it's not just the absence of war, right? It's this conscious choice that we all have to actively work towards. And that work, it starts with each of us.
Okay, so we've talked about the complexities, the dangers of escalation, and those glimmers of hope offered by the people working for peace. But where do we go from here? Is there any way at all out of this, what feels like an endless cycle of violence?
Well, that's what we're going to explore in the final part of our deep dive. We'll look at some potential paths towards a peaceful resolution. We'll examine, what it would actually take for both sides to lay down their arms and maybe, just maybe, build a future free from fear and violence.
So we've talked about how complex this conflict is, right?
Mm-hmm.
The dangers of things escalating even further. And, but those glimmers of hope, those people working towards peace. But the big question, where do we go from here? Is a peaceful resolution, is that even possible at this point?
Well, it's definitely not going to be easy, but I wouldn't say it's impossible. If we look back at history, it shows us that even the most intractable conflicts, they can be resolved through diplomacy, through dialogue. It's possible.
I really hope you're right. But what would that even look like? What are the first steps towards peace in this particular conflict?
I think it would require, a fundamental shift in mindset, right, from both sides. A move away from this zero-sum game that's been dominating this conflict for so long.
Zero-sum game. Not sure I'm familiar with that term.
Sure. It basically means that, one side's gain is automatically the other side's loss. So it creates this mentality where compromise is seen as weakness and any concession, is seen as a defeat.
Ah, I see. So breaking free from that mindset, that would be crucial. But how do you do that when both sides have been so deeply entrenched in this conflict for, well, I mean, for so long?
It would take, well, a willingness to see peace not as as a victory for one side and a defeat for the other, but as a win-win, a scenario that actually benefits everyone involved.
Okay, that sounds, yeah, good read in theory. But in a region where there's, I mean, so much mistrust, how do you even get both sides to, to just sit down at the table?
I think it starts with, small steps, confidence-building measures that demonstrate, a genuine commitment to peace. For example, both sides could agree to, a ceasefire, a halt to all military operations.
Yeah, I mean, that would definitely de-escalate things for sure.
Yeah.
But what about actually addressing the underlying issues, the things that are fueling this conflict?
Well, that would be the next step, negotiations. They'd need to address things like land rights, security concerns, and of course, the status of Jerusalem.
Oof, those are some pretty weighty topics. And I imagine there would be a lot of resistance
Yeah.
on both sides to making any concessions.
For sure. These are incredibly sensitive issues. I mean, they've been at the heart of this conflict for decades. It would require both sides to be willing to compromise, right? To maybe put aside those maximalist demands and really focus on finding solutions that address the core needs of both Israelis and Palestinians.
And let's be real here, right? Compromise is a tough sell,
Hmm.
especially when you've got those hardliners on both sides who just see any concession as a betrayal.
That's true. And that's where I think the role of the international community, it becomes really crucial. The US, Europe, Russia, China, they all have a stake in seeing this conflict resolved. They need to exert diplomatic pressure, right, on both sides to get them to the table, to get them to negotiate in good faith.
So a lot of pressure from the global community, and then some serious compromise from the Israelis and the Palestinians. But what about the people on the ground? The people who've lost loved ones, lost their homes. How do you convince them to support peace?
And that's where those grassroots peace building efforts that we talked about earlier, that's where they become so important. It's
Yeah.
about fostering that dialogue and understanding, but at the community level,
Hmm.
bringing together those ordinary Israelis and Palestinians, people who might otherwise, they might never even interact.
So creating those personal connections, building empathy and trust. It sounds like a long shot, but I guess, I mean, it's got to be worth a try.
It is. Remember, peace, it's not just, something that happens at the government level. It's something that needs to be built from the ground up.
Okay. So we've got a ceasefire, negotiations, compromise, grassroots peace building. That's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah.
Do you really think is it actually possible to pull all of that off?
Like I said, it's not going to be easy. It'll take immense effort, commitment, and a shared belief, a belief in the possibility of peace. But I refuse to believe that it's impossible.
I think that's the key takeaway here, isn't it? We can't give in to despair or cynicism.
Yeah.
We have to hold on to that belief that peace is possible, even when things feel, well, incredibly bleak.
Exactly. And that's where you come in, right? The listener, staying informed, engaging in meaningful conversations, advocating for peaceful solutions. These are all actions that, they all contribute to a more peaceful world.
Well, this deep dive, it's definitely taken us on a journey, hasn't it? We've explored, I don't know, the historical roots of this conflict, the key players, the dangers if things escalate, those glimmers of hope. It's been, complex, and at times, I'll be honest, it's been overwhelming. But I do feel like I have a better understanding now of what's really at stake.
And that understanding, it's crucial because the choices we make, the choices we make today, they're going to shape the future of this region and the world. So keep learning, keep asking those questions, and keep working for peace.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive. We hope you found it, informative and thought-provoking. We encourage you to keep exploring this topic, to seek out, diverse perspectives and to engage in those meaningful conversations about peace and justice. Remember, this was just the beginning. There's always more to learn,